Hi there, it's Jill again. Why is it really important that you maybe know a little bit about the skeleton? I've left the skeleton sitting there at the back there. Why is it important that you know a little bit about the skeleton? Well, the ribs start, if you can see from the back there, the ribs start really very high right up here, and they extend down. If you put your fingers along the front of your body, you'll feel the line of your ribs extending all the way down. There's not much gap at the side between your ribs and your pelvis. If you can see the skeleton in the background there, it'll look as if there's quite a big gap, but if you actually feel on yourself, you might find that there's actually not as much space as that. So the lungs sit inside the ribs. So as I often say to people, a lot of us is lung, and of course the heart is also positioned sort of in the centre and slightly off to one side, the left. The articulation of the ribs is incredibly important because the shape of that part of the spine, the thoracic spine, is designed for a lot of sideways shifting, it's designed for a lot of side bending, and it's also designed for rotation. And the reason being that as we walk and we move and we run, we move opposite hand with opposite leg. So when you walk down the road and you're relaxed and your arms are hanging relaxed, what you'll find is that you naturally have a tendency to swing opposite hand and opposite leg. Now, and that's because of the design of the spine. The spine is designed to transmit movement, and it's very clever. When we are aware of what goes on and how the rib cage is designed, we can begin to start to think about what would happen if that whole area from what is effectively just below the base of the neck right the way down through to our belly was being held as a solid lump. So what I'd like you to do is to imagine you're wearing a suit of armour. That's the best way of describing it. And if you think of a breastplate and maybe a back plate which is fixed together at the sides but on so firmly and hard, it's like a cast holding that piece solid. If you were to bend forward or bend backward or sideways bend or twist, that solid area would actually really restrict your movement. Now, the reason that I wanted to show you about the ribs is because when we are tightening muscles and it's a brain response, so in other words, our muscles don't have a life of their own, they just do what our system tells them to do. So when we run the program in our brain that causes us to fire off those muscles in between the ribs, and they're called intercostals. When we hold those muscles together, if you imagine your fingers coming around and other fingers coming around like this, and fitting in, because each rib, if you like, makes, I'll use my phone here as an example, you've got the body of a vertebra here, which is what my phone is pretending to be. Actually no, this can be the disc. So above it here would sit the, let's put this on top here, above it would sit one vertebra, and we'll have another one underneath, and below it would sit another vertebra. So it's a bit like a sandwich. Alright, so this is the body of one vertebra, which is a chunky piece of bone. This is the body of another, which is another chunky piece of bone, and here we have the disc. So if you remember from that what I showed you just now, as the rib comes round, it forms an articulation, and that articulation goes in, if I bring these out like this, it goes in like this, so the actual rib would have to be much fatter for it to work, right? But it's going in here, alright? So it's making a joint with this bone, and it's making a joint with this bone, so it's going to be bigger than this pen. Now, the next one up also does the same thing, and when the muscles in between the ribs contract, which they do in any action where, if, say, you're feeling a little bit stressed, a little bit tense, hold your breath like this, you contract not only those muscles in between the ribs, but you also contract the muscles on the surface. What that's going to do is it's going to hold the whole of that rib cage absolutely solid. So it's going to mean that you are unable to move the rib cage. And this is a very, very, very important point. And I remember when I learnt anatomy as a physiotherapy undergraduate, we didn't go into detail quite so much on the way that the ribs articulate, but this is a very important thing for any athlete to understand, because as soon as you begin to start to contract those muscles through stress, fear, habit, whatever it may be, you contract those muscles and it becomes extremely difficult to make this nice sideways, pliable, lengthening, extending and twisting movement. So during Feldenkrais lessons, and certainly the soma coding work which I've developed, a lot of the work actually involves reintegrating movement in the spine, because if you've got a problem at the base of your neck, when you sit, you get pain here, or if you've got a problem at the bottom part of your back, what you actually want to do is stop you from moving that bit quite so much and maybe move somewhere else for a while so that the other areas have a chance to settle down. Because the great thing about the body is that we know that if you get any tweaks or twinges or injuries or whatever, usually if you give it sufficient time for it to heal and mend, it does. If there's obviously a huge damage there, which maybe an orthopedic consultant considers that they can improve, well, that could be another course for a podcast. But one of the things I'd like you to be thinking about is that structure of the skeleton there, because this is really important, and it's not something that we can vary. We all have a skeleton. The plastic skeletons all look the same. Every skeleton is slightly different, but we operate around certain constraints. And if you go and look in any, and I've got them all over the place here, if I just turn my look, that's just some of my diary of lists of books and books over here. I've got books everywhere, because this is my upstairs office. But if you just look in some of those anatomy books, what you'll find is that all of them show the diagram of the articulations of the ribs into the thoracic spine in exactly the same way. So we'll talk about this a little bit more. If you have opportunity to have a look at that LinkedIn page that I'll put a link up to so that you can have a look, see yourself at the diagram, that's great. Or if you have the opportunity to have a look into any anatomy books, you can have a look for yourself. Or if you have the chance to have a look at a plastic skeleton like that, don't just look at it from the back. Look at it from inside to see exactly where those ribs go up. And what you'll find is that it's a very interesting series of articulations that takes place either side. So I'm going to stop this now and carry on again.